we can restore southwestern forests.
We are working to create sustainable wildlands.
Healthier forests.
Healthier watersheds.
Healthier grasslands.
Healthier meadows.
Healthier streams.
Healthier trees.
Healthier wildlife habitat.
Healthier wildflowers.
Healthier soils. Healthier fire conditions.
We're putting fire back into the ecosystem.
We need healthier economies.
Sustainable jobs.
Sustainable communities.
At the Ecological Restoration Institute, we're finding solutions to unhealthy ecosystems.
That's what we do.
That's what I do.
I'm with the Ecological Restoration Institute at Northern Arizona University.
I'm with ERI.
We're at NAU. Let's restore.
Let's restore. Let's restore southwestern forests.
From outer space, they can now see the fire that is raging near Los Alamos and threatening structures.
If you wanted to destroy frequent fire forests like ponderosa pine, dry mix conifer forest, you couldn't do it much better than the way we did it. This is the worst thing these ecosystems have experienced in the past 70 million years.
Those of us who are here now have a responsibility. We always say to try to make it better. Frankly, it's getting worse.
We need to get busy and get to work because we've really only got the next 20 years to maybe make a difference up here. Few places mark time as dramatically as the Grand Canyon, but our western forests have been around for millions of years. They've survived broad changes in temperature, drought, even ice ages. Today, these ecosystems are in widespread decline, facing perhaps their greatest challenge yet.
We're at a point now where our forests are very fragile. And it's a scary time.
Forested wildlands of the western United States have long inspired pioneers, writers, and scientists. Vivid reports from early explorers describe deep canyons, majestic pines, knee-deep grasses, lush wetlands, and fertile soil. However, just a century later, it seems our western forests are under attack from every direction. Armies of bark beetles, devastating disease outbreaks, and unstoppable infernos threaten the beauty, function, and life of these important wildlands and the people who depend upon them. Recent droughts have exacerbated the problem. Growing concerns of climate change have underscored ecologists' urgent call to save our forests under fire.
The temperature globally has warmed about 1 degree Fahrenheit over the past 50 years, and in Arizona and the Southwest it's warmed more quickly, about 2.5 degrees. So things are changing rapidly.
Scientists say our future forests depend on today's success in the race to restore the American West. Just north of Flagstaff, Arizona, the G.A. Pearson Natural Area serves as an outdoor laboratory for forest research. Since 1908, foresters have studied how trees grow in the middle of the largest contiguous stand of ponderosa pines in the world.
But these sometimes fall in the traps too, and we collect everything that falls.
Regents Professor of Forest Ecology, Dr. Wally Covington, is the Executive Director of the Ecological Restoration Institute at Northern Arizona University.
So it allows us to look at the return of nutrients.
He has devoted a lifetime to the understanding of forest ecosystems that have evolved with fire.
We protect the old growth trees, so that then sucks the water. To measure that, we use these soil.
Started principally by lightning, fire was a frequent visitor here. It would creep along the forest floor, burning up dead logs, pine needles, and other forest debris. It was fire that kept trees from crowding each other out. It revved up the resin flow and the vigor of mature trees, making them stronger, thicker, and more resilient.
Before pioneers arrived, openings took up far more of the forest than the trees. Grasses and wildflowers had plenty of room.
What has happened during the last century has changed the natural processes and structure of the forest. Researchers say too much livestock grazing early on ate up the grasses. They used to carry the frequent low-intensity surface fires that once rejuvenated grasses and wildflowers and thinned out overly abundant conifer seedlings. Big old-growth trees that grew in groups were removed by heavy logging. Fire, seen as a threat to lives and property, was put out as soon as it got started. And all over the West, young trees became established, choking out the landscape.
You can see how dark and closed in these forests have become. Where there were once 15 to 30 trees per acre, there are now hundreds, in some cases even thousands, all competing for water, sunlight, and nutrients.
The loss of grasses and wildflowers, the addition of more trees, and the abrupt ending of fire added up to a deadly combination.
And this is probably the original scar that came down as a lightning strike. You look out here and you say, healthy forest. You look in here and you say, not so healthy.
As ecosystems weakened, symptoms of an unhealthy forest began to appear. In western Colorado, red pine needles mark beetle-killed trees. Across the West, different kinds of bark beetles have unleashed a mighty attack. They tunnel under the bark through the cambium layer of drought-stressed trees, cutting off the circulation of water and food. Tired and dehydrated, the trees can't create enough resin to push the bugs out, so creatures the size of a grain of rice are killing entire forests. NAU forest entomologist Dr. Rich Hofstetter says the infestation is expected to get worse. As warmer temperatures allow the tiny killers to thrive for longer periods of time, more generations of hungry bark beetles are finding a feast waiting for them in these dense forests.
It takes hundreds of years. These are slow-growing trees. They're actually really well defended typically, but when conditions change, it only takes weeks, sometimes days, for a tree to die.
In addition, unprecedented disease outbreaks have wreaked havoc in the woods. Aspen groves are a favorite attraction in the fall as their delicate leaves light up the hillsides with shades of gold and orange. But these vibrant trees are fading away in disturbing numbers at lower elevations. Foresters are calling it sad or sudden aspen decline. It is a sad sight indeed. Forest Service Southwest Region plant pathologist Mary Lou Fairweather is peeling back the layers of mystery around SAD and examining the fungi and the insects that are killing the trees.
Here we have a Cytospora canker. That you can see the dark area here is where the tree underneath the bark in the cambial area has been killed back.
Throughout northern Arizona's lower elevation aspen groves, there are huge pockets of mortality. Up to 95% of the aspen are dying around 7,000 feet. Evidence of disease and insects is everywhere.
We also found bark beetles, which again are not normally aggressive on these aspen, and these are the little galleries right on the outside of the bark here.
Northern Arizona University forestry graduate student Tom Ziegler is diagnosing the sick aspen.
Bronze poplar borer.
He says severe frost and drought in recent years have stressed the trees.
Along that line of the decline syndrome, the insects and disease are fairly late. They're the ones that find weakened trees and then kill them off.
Ecological Restoration Institute researcher Katie Ireland says fire, or more specifically the lack of natural fire, may be impacting the aspen. Through tree rings, Ireland is determining when the last time fire burned here.
And when you have a fire come through, it'll often kill the overstory trees and allow the roots to produce new aspen.
Researchers say deer and elk look at an aspen grove the same way that kids look at ice cream. The bark is soft and much easier to bite into and digest than the nearby pines.
So this is an aspen sprout that's regenerated, and as you can see, every single one of the branches have been nipped off by ungulates, usually elk in this area.
Ironically, here at a place called Aspen Hill near Williams, the only living aspen are inside this fence. But they can't fence every aspen stand, so researchers are hoping to help land managers understand what's happening to the aspen before this popular deciduous tree fades permanently from the lower elevations of the mountainous west.
And so by losing aspen, we're also losing a lot of biological diversity in these areas for not only plants but also for wildlife. Deer and elk love aspen stands. They come in, especially after disturbances when you have smaller aspen remnants, and the deer and elk, they come in and they eat those. They also nest in these areas. And so both socially for people as far as an area of beauty to go to in an area of conifer trees, but also biologically.
Also disappearing from the forest are sunlit openings. Trees encroaching into meadows are shrinking open spaces, taking up water and drying out wetlands.
43.2.
Difficult as it may be to imagine, these Ecological Restoration Institute researchers are working in what used to be an open meadow.
Now it's a closed canopy ponderosa pine forest that is very dense, very thick, and lots of young big trees up here.
By cutting a clean slice from this old stump to clearly see the tree rings, the Nature Conservancy's Neil Chapman says fast-growing pines in Hart Prairie are waging a heart attack by taking over the meadow.
Growth rates for the first 30 years here are just phenomenal. They're very thick rings, and by the time it was about 35, it was already 16 plus inches in diameter.
Historic photographs show Hart Prairie was at least twice as big when pioneers moved in the late 1800s. That's when fire rolled through naturally every few years, preventing little pines like this one from getting established.
Trees move into a meadow, it significantly changes the habitat that's available to natural native wildlife.
And high alpine meadows similar to this are often encroached by pines, so it's definitely a problem across the West.
Researchers like Brian Moss are aging all the trees in the meadow. They're working to identify the old-growth pines, the ones that were here naturally, and the younger ones that came in after fire was excluded. Young, big pines that may have to go, or rather require open heart surgery to open Hart Prairie. With the overabundance of trees, treetops are creating thick, connecting canopies. These now intercept much of the snow, where it evaporates into the air instead of making it to the ground, where it can melt and replenish the soil. As this drying trend is occurring all over the West, scientists are concerned about the disappearance of seeps and springs.
This is fairly typical of a wetland soil.
Most of us would simply call this mud, but this dark, messy, sloshy soil is as good as gold in the arid Southwest. To wetland biologists like Dr. Jim Allen, the executive director of Northern Arizona University's School of Forestry, a soggy, mucky meadow is an indicator of forest health.
You can imagine, acres and acres of this, 5, 6, 10 feet deep before you get to bedrock, how much water might be stored in a wet meadow and gradually released downstream over time.
This spongy, spring-fed meadow is keeping plants and animals well watered. There used to be a lot of these, but not anymore.
The very first explorers, the very first pioneers coming through here, they would have moved through an area that had very open forest in the uplands right above us here, and then they would have come through one meadow after another as they worked their way, say, from east to west across northern Arizona.
Now, deeply eroded gullies quickly whisk water away. Dry meadows carry only memories of old stream channels, and scientists like NAU's Dr. Abe Springer say our overcrowded pine forests are draining our wetlands.
If we return the forest density
to a more pre-settlement condition with a more natural fire regime, most of our indicators and studies show that we should modestly increase the amount of surface runoff and increase the amount of recharge to the aquifers by decreasing the amount of water that the trees and the vegetation uses and returns to the atmosphere.
By thinning the forest, rebuilding shallow streams, and reducing the impact of grazing animals, researchers like Carissa Ramstead are confident we can return the wet to wetlands.
You want to see more graminoids, which graminoids means grass species, more highly on the sedges and rushes. They help stabilize banks.
Banks that are buzzing with activity and oozing with organically rich potential.
Crowded with fuel and weakened by competition, forests, once reinvigorated by frequent surface fires, now have a deadly relationship with crown fire. Today, billions of small trees line up like matchsticks all across the landscapes of the West.
Just like the rungs on a ladder, it allows the fire to move from a surface up into the canopy.
Is the wallow fire and the other fires that we have burning throughout Arizona, are those symptoms of the disease that you talk about, have been talking about for years, about overgrowth in our forests?
Yes, they are exactly. And you know, it's not new that we're having crown fires. That's been occurring since the 1950s. Of course, the natural fires in these forests are surface fires. They're just burning through the grasses and wildflowers in the understory and a few years of accumulation of pine needles. They used to occur about every 5 to 10 years or so. But as fuels accumulated after we eliminated those frequent fires, those fuels built up, and eventually the trees that came in reached the heights where they could carry fire into the treetops of the old growth trees. That began in about 1950, as you know, 1940, 1950. But what's been happening is the fires have been getting bigger and bigger, and several of us looking at this as it occurred across the landscape recognized that they were going to just continue to get bigger and bigger until they burned entire landscapes, and that's where we are right now.
New Mexico and Arizona experienced their largest forest fires in history during the summer of 2011. The Las Conchas fire near Los Alamos burned some 60% of the Bandelier National Monument.
It started out, 20 miles as the crow flies from here, something like that, on the afternoon of the 26th of June. And by that evening, it had gone 40,000 acres, which was just unprecedented. And much of that was really, really severe. Within the next few days, it had gone 156,500 acres.
Pushed by 40-mile-an-hour wind gusts, fires like the 2010 Schultz fire on the San Francisco peaks above Flagstaff can rip through 15,000 acres of important watersheds in a matter of days.
Schultz fire has the opportunity to bankrupt this county in order to be able to repair all the damage that was created.
The fast-moving 70,000-acre Missionary Ridge fire north of Durango was one of Colorado's largest. It started in the Gamble Oak and moved upward, killing everything in its path right on up to the timberline. In eastern Arizona, the monstrous half-million-acre Wallow fire burned up critical Mexican spotted owl habitat and human homes. United States Senator John Kyle has been a longtime advocate for the science behind forest restoration. From his front porch, he can see the destruction. Flames came within yards of his cabin. Some of his neighbors weren't so lucky.
I mean, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm disappointed, I'm saddened when you see it out there, and yet you see within 2 months of the fire, I walk around and I see aspen that are already 18 to 20 inches high. You see the grass and the flowers coming back. And so there is a regeneration that occurs. The aspen certainly will be back quickly, but how many generations will it be before the same kind of thing that I've been able to enjoy will be available for great-great-grandkids? It'll be at least 3 or 4 generations, I suspect.
The cost of fighting these enormous wildfires, along with the impacts on wildlife, communities, and watersheds, adds up to staggering sums of money, conservatively more than $1 billion. Wally Covington explains to listeners on Northern Arizona's Mitch and Joe radio show at 105.1 FM, The Big Talker.
When you look at the amount of money we're spending on fires, on the Wallow fire that you were just talking about.
Here it comes.
Here we go. You know, on the Wallow fire, that final cost is going to be probably 110 million, 120 million. The multiplier effect for the total cost of a fire, how many times suppression cost is the final cost of the fire, the damage to the economy, the rehabilitation cost and all of that, is typically in the range of 3 to 30 times the direct suppression cost. So if you take a number like, let's say it's 10, okay, that would be in the neighborhood of $1 billion.
Following these huge fire events are damaging and deadly floods. They carry ash, silt, boulders, and logs and clog up water sources below. The sound of thunder now strikes terror in the hearts of residents.
We used to see the rain as being peaceful, healthy for our world that we live in, and now it turns your life upside down.
Tom Tilford and his neighbors in Greer survived the 500,000-acre Wallow fire, but today they prepare for floods.
The first flow was at least 2 to 2.5 feet deep, and it spanned out 30, 40, it spanned out the length of this area.
Sandbags are part of the landscape now, piled high against homes and businesses as folks here try to hold back flash floods and eroding mountainsides.
This burned soil doesn't absorb water anymore. It repels water, it's hydrophobic.
Silt, debris, and boulders carried by floodwaters have taken out this alpine home.
It moved the foundation, tore out the walls, and pushed rocks into the structure.
This kind of mortality that we're seeing in here is completely unnatural.
Ecologist Dr. Wally Covington with the Ecological Restoration Institute at NAU says intense forest fires that burn through the treetops, like the Wallow fire, deliver a 1-2 punch.
A lot of people focus on just the immediate impacts of these large unnatural fires that we've been having, and that's devastating. It's devastating, of course, immediately to wildlife habitat and to human habitats. But there's a secondary impact that people are often unaware of, and that is that we start having major flood events.
Major flood events still occur in Flagstaff a year after the Schultz fire.
In the aftermath of New Mexico's Las Conchas fire, a wall of 20,000 sandbags stands between flash floods and ancient Pueblo artifacts.
And some of our trail disappeared as well. There's one section of trail that's just thin air now, and nobody knows what we're going to do about that.
Wow.
When fire burns unnaturally hot, it leaves behind a graveyard of dead trees. But it's the invisible damage that scientists are learning more about, damage that impacts the environment long after the flames are gone.
We don't have as much decomposition happening on the outside of the tree as opposed to the inside.
Charred logs, standing dead tree trunks, and decaying branches mark the site of the Hochtifer fire that burned hot near Flagstaff. Northern Arizona University forest ecologists Mike Stoddard and Matthew Hurto are looking for a sign, any sign of ponderosa pine seedlings some 15 years after the 16,000-acre fire.
We're concerned about ponderosa pine not regenerating after these wildfire events.
We have a site here that is not taking up carbon dioxide and storing it
at all right now.
We all know trees breathe in carbon dioxide, but how long they can hold it affects the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
This is something that's called an eddy covariance system.
As air flows through the fingers of this claw-like device, NAU tree physiologist Tom Kolb can measure the carbon dioxide that's moving between the air and the land.
The fire has had a long-term legacy effect on the capacity of the site to take in carbon dioxide and store carbon dioxide. Prior to the fire, this was a dense forest that would take in somewhere between 100 and 200 grams of carbon per square meter of land per year. After the fire, now it's actually releasing CO2 to the atmosphere.
Remains of intense fires dot the west. This is the site of the Cerro Grande fire that burned 48,000 acres near Santa Fe, New Mexico in the year 2000.
It may be, 100, 200 years or more, if ever, before some of these stands are forested.
Greenhouse gases were emitted during the fire, and live trees that used to store carbon in the wood are now dead trees releasing carbon dioxide years later.
If we reduce the amount of trees per acre and return fire as a process to the system to manage the surface fuels, the carbon that's left in the forest, in the live trees, is much more stable.
Carbon Flex research shows trees in this thinned forest are capturing carbon dioxide. They're less likely to burn up in a high-severity fire than trees in an unthinned forest. With an estimated 300 million acres of fire-adapted forests in North America on the verge of collapse, ecologists, educators, environmental activists, loggers, ranchers, and elected officials, along with foresters and other conservationists, are forming an unusual alliance. Across the West, people are coming together to solve the problem on scales never tried before.
To hold it in place and to
providing millions of dollars to help support these collaborative forest landscape restoration projects is the U.S. Forest Service. Southwestern Regional Forester Corbin Newman says these projects must mimic the size of today's wildfires to be effective.
This program gives us the opportunity to look at a broad section of land, that a landscape, if you will, that is of the scale that you can really make a difference, that a system can have all its pieces and parts, and we can truly build into it the resilience to deal with some of these impacts.
In the Sierra National Forest near Fresno, California, foresters say this is what successful collaboration looks and sounds like.
Did you copy that?
Picking through 157,000 acres, the community is committed to protecting the forest and homes.
It's a phenomenal project.
The Dinky Project is one of the nation's collaborative forest landscape restoration projects. High Sierra District Ranger Mose Jones-Yellen says this area is in the wildland-urban interface. That's where homes are built right into the thick of the woods.
We're bringing together a whole series of different stakeholders, different interested parties, and with that group of people, we're looking at 10 years worth of restoration projects in a particular spot in the forest where a lot of different interests meet and where management historically has been somewhat complex and somewhat contentious.
In the past, some of our projects have been held up by timely and costly litigation because our planning may not have had enough involvement or buy-in from our public. So by doing a collaborative, we iron out all of those issues beforehand so that once we have a plan in place, we can move forward. And that's exactly what we've been seeing here on the Dinky Collaborative Project.
Kirby Mullen says the forest had become so overgrown, it was difficult to find this road.
We're taking out some of the smaller trees and producing a product with it. The other thing too is there's people employed in our sawmill, probably 130 of them, that are getting jobs because this is one of the jobs that we're doing.
One of the challenges of thinning the High Sierra and other forests is making sure animals like the Pacific fisher have what they need to survive.
They're in the weasel family, so a lot of times people are familiar with what a mink or an otter looks like, or maybe a weasel as well. They're a little bit bigger than a mink and smaller than an otter. They're kind of chocolatey brown with a little bit of like blonde frosting on the top of their head. They have a little pointed nose, a little bit like a fox, but then small round ears and a really long thin body and a big bushy tail. So and they are as agile as squirrels traveling through the forest. Pretty amazing to see.
Using transmitters that pick up signals from GPS collars on fishers, wildlife biologists from the Pacific Southwest Research Station are studying how these mammals are using restored areas.
We need to learn more about fisher habitat needs at larger spatial scales, because fishers have very large home ranges. They occur at low densities, and so we need to understand how they're using the landscape.
In the mountains of western Colorado, the Uncompahgre Plateau project is focused on 160,000 acres. This includes key watersheds that feed the mighty Colorado River. This project also is cultivating tomorrow's foresters.
We've got 20% cover of this pseudostellaria.
Emily Bernier is a forestry intern with the Ouray National Forest. This college student is planning to be a surgeon one day, but for now, instead of treating sick people, she's part of a large-scale effort to heal a sick forest.
We're seeing forest health issues in almost every species.
The stands have all become really dense over time because of excluding fire in these landscapes.
Lots of young trees competing with each other for nutrients add up to millions of acres at risk. Here on the Colorado Uncompahgre Plateau and across much of the West, unnaturally dense forests are vulnerable to catastrophic fire and bark beetle infestation.
In western Colorado, scientists, educators, and community members are looking for signs of what the forest looked like before pioneers arrived. Signs like fire scars and old stumps.
The idea on the Uncompahgre project, like many of the restoration projects throughout the West, is to first determine what the natural conditions were. What was the carrying capacity of the land? What's the natural tree densities and patterns? How much understory production was there?
Northern Arizona University Regents Professor Dr. Wally Covington is part of the Southwestern Ecological Restoration Institutes. Covington and others are striving for resilient forests that resemble a more natural forest structure.
When I was 14 years old, it was more open. It's almost oppressive how closed much of the plateau is these days.
So our top problem in some ways is that we've lost something that's not quite the forest, it's the meadows that are a key part of the forest ecosystem.
But to remove the excess small diameter trees, the wood products industry has to figure out how to make the process cost effective. Eric Sorensen operates the Delta Timber Company. The Delta Mill is one of only 2 remaining large mills in Colorado.
We're trying to look at every aspect of that log and get everything out of the log that we can.
This collaborative effort on the Uncompahgre Plateau is expected to result in 10,000 treated acres a year for the next decade.
Some of the work that we've been doing with the restoration project is really a bit more intense and a bit larger scale than some of the projects we've done up until this point.
Colorado Wild Director Ryan Bidwell calls this thinning project an important first step to saving the forest.
It's a work in progress. It's not to say that this is beautiful right now, but I think we all know where we need to take this forest.
Whether you're taking care of people or trees, you're still trying to better the world.
And in one of the most fire-ravaged states in the country, efforts are underway to take on the nation's largest forest restoration project ever. Equipped with the best available science and support from a wide variety of interest groups, the Forest Service is leading the way across 2.4 million vulnerable acres in northern Arizona. It's called the Four Forests Restoration Initiative, or FORFRI.
This is a very large-scale project, and we're going to be looking at very many more acres to treat than we've ever done in the past here. The reason to do that is to try to change our landscape as quickly as we can to avoid some of the serious impacts of the fires that we've seen over the years.
It's just huge. Our first NEPA project is 750,000 acre analysis area. That in and of itself is a daunting task. Trying to pull together all the data to have some site-specific information as to what we need to do out on the ground to restore these systems is a daunting task. And to be very honest, the stakeholders group, the collaborative stakeholders, have really helped us with that process.
Public opinion is so important, and if we don't have public support, the entire project could collapse.
I think it really shows the range of possibilities that people can meet when they work hard together.
To have a summer with no major wildfires would be something that we would look back at this year as a change in a sea tide of change that's been going on the last few decades. So this is historic. This gives us an opportunity to make a very meaningful change in the kinds of fires that we're having in this country.
In addition to the landscape scale projects, other forest restoration efforts are striving to make a difference. Near Albuquerque, groups have come together to build a brighter future out of sticks and branches. This may be the sound of forests growing healthier, communities becoming safer, and economies getting stronger. Angelita Apaquito lives on the Alamo Navajo Reservation. It's a quiet place of about 2,000 people.
Everybody knows each other, everybody tries to help each other.
Most live in poverty. Gearing up to change that are foresters slicing into opportunity where there are too many trees and not enough jobs.
We had some equipment, including wood splitters and a yarder, that we felt the Alamo Navajo community could use.
Dr. Andrew Egan, director of the New Mexico Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute, says a trained workforce is critical to thinning crowded, fire-prone forests.
We now have people here who are trained in felling, trained in primary processing. They're also trained in restoration monitoring.
Well, it helps me because this job is real close to our home on the reservation.
Homes in this thick pinyon juniper forest south of Albuquerque are considered some of the most at risk for fire. But now the wood from these little trees that nobody wanted could be showing up all over the world in products such as firewood and wood flooring.
Our biggest market is in West Texas, but we've shipped some to Chicago. We've shipped stuff to North Carolina. We shipped about 300 plus cords last year.
Bill Ferranti with the Alamo Navajo School Board says this project is on the cutting edge of southwestern forest restoration, an effort that's supported by Old Wood.
This was cut by a crew at the Alamo Navajo tribe.
David Old, owner of Old Wood, is building a market out of sticks and branches.
The whole plant is really scaled and geared towards making flooring from smaller trees.
If his idea stacks up, Old will create a new foundation for some 50 employees in a $2 million a year operation. Beneficial, low-intensity fire is an important piece of forest health that's been missing from much of the West. In places where thinning has occurred and excess fuels have been removed, fire managers are using lightning strikes to their advantage. North of Williams, Arizona, the 2011 Beale fire behaved the way fire managers say fire should. Flames burned logs and old stumps, winding around the base, but not killing the big old-growth trees. The 2010 sheep fire in the Sierra National Forest also proved to be beneficial. Neil Metcalf served as the incident commander on that fire that burned park and forest land for months.
The large trees, for the most part, were safe, and the smaller trees, and then ground fuels like big logs and stuff, would burn. So this tree here, this little cedar, since it was a small tree, didn't survive the 1 and 2 foot flame lengths where the tall trees did.
And the giant sequoia forest is also a fire-adapted system. Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park fire education specialist Deborah Schweizer says prior to returning fire to this forest, baby sequoias were missing from the ecosystem.
The significance of giant forest for us is it's one of the areas where we have gotten very close to restoring fire to its natural regime.
Big part of my job is getting folks to understand that not all fire is bad.
Smoke is probably the best example of an increasing social dynamic.
As we're seeing, beauty can grow from the ashes of degraded ecosystems. Ecologists and economists say that beauty can take the form of ecological sustainability and economic opportunity. An NAU study estimates the 20-year For Forests Restoration Initiative will create 15,000 much-needed jobs and pump $1.3 billion into Arizona's economy.
And that's been one of the unique
Northern Arizona University President John Hager says research universities will be a key part of the solution. NAU promotes the philosophy of stewards of place.
We have a responsibility to help our communities in terms of economic development, in terms of resolving particular social issues and economic issues. It could be issues related to fire, water, education. And that's a particular responsibility for a regional university.
Most agree now is a pivotal time for restoration and innovation. In the Black Hills of South Dakota, energy is being produced from the excess trees in overcrowded forests. That energy, now biomass, is used to heat schools.
Energy is what everybody right now thinks, if we could just find a way to figure out how to convert all of that biomass into an energy that then could heat homes and power industry while providing jobs, there's a huge opportunity there that I hate to see us miss.
If you look at the Forest Restoration Project, part of that is about trying to clean the forests, get out the undergrowth, and if you do that and leave it on the floor of the forest, then you have to burn it there. That is actually can be brought back in terms of biomass plant, and ultimately it's a replacement for fossil fuels. So all around, everybody would benefit.
As crown fires, insects, and disease threaten vast landscapes of the American West, land managers stress the urgency to take action on these imperiled wildlands.
We're in a race with Mother Nature. Mother Nature will reset it with insect and disease and fire, or we can reset it by wise tinkering that lets us put these systems in a condition that those natural forces play a more natural role in the process. And so for me, the urgency's been around for 10 years and it's doing nothing but growing.
You know, this tree is on death's doorstep. It'll be dead in the next year's time.
Scientists say restoring ecological and economic health to these forests under fire is so critical to the American West that it requires a national laser-like focus. A focus that involves an understanding of ecological processes, objective use of the best available science, treating landscapes at the scale of today's wildfires, returning low-intensity fire to the land, finding uses for small-diameter trees, ensuring a steady wood supply for wood and biomass-based industries, and developing new natural resource-based jobs. It will take the collaboration of stakeholders with various values and goals, a commitment to monitor our actions on the ground, and an encouraging environment of learning, innovation, and creativity.
As a responsibility that present generations have for future generations is to leave a situation, to leave the world in a better place.
It's being called a race against time, but the reward is a landscape legacy for generations to come.
We can restore southwestern forests.
We are working to create sustainable wildlands.
Healthier forests.
Healthier watersheds.
Healthier grasslands.
Healthier meadows.
Healthier streams.
Healthier trees.
Healthier wildlife habitat. Healthier wildflowers.
Healthier soils. Healthier fire conditions.
We're putting fire back into the ecosystem.
We need healthier economies.
Sustainable jobs.
Sustainable communities.
At the Ecological Restoration Institute, we're finding solutions to unhealthy ecosystems.
That's what we do.
That's what I do.
I'm with the Ecological Restoration Institute at Northern Arizona University.
I'm with ERI.
We're at NAU. Let's restore.
Let's restore.
Let's restore southwestern forests.